Okay, in
Hey,
person. Look at this, the
I
coordination.
know, fancy, right?
Yes. Okay, friends, this is Jonathan Cottrell, JC, CEO of Journeyage, and also founder of Phoenix Startup Week. Yes,
I mean, I wouldn't go that far, but I
I'm
had a
hyping
hand
you.
and I give you my sincere kudos for continuing to carry the torch.
It is fun hosting a conference on Zoom. We learn so much.
Excellent.
And
Well,
then
we're
we
happy to be
have
here.
Emily Anne, CEO of A for Arizona, joining us. And I am so pumped. This is like one of my favorites. I've been looking forward to this talk and telling everybody they better show up. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to let JC do what he does well, which is talk and bring the best out of people. And we're going to let Emily Anne educate us. Thanks so much, guys. Have fun.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Kate.
Well, as was said, I do have some history with Phoenix Startup Week, but it's been a while. But there's no better opportunity to rejoin in speaking at Phoenix Startup Week than to get to hear all the amazing things you're doing, Emily Anne Gullickson. And I know, just as we're kicking off here within the startup community, we talk a lot about the next generation, all the things that are really important for our community, right? That we are raising up the next CEOs and engineers and designers and developers and all these different folks that foster a really healthy community. So here, I'd like to introduce you just in my own words.
Okay.
I am really happy to be here with Emily Anne Gullickson. She is a voracious reader. She is a collegiate athlete, former Red Bull addict. We might have to hear about that. Teacher, a lawyer, an innovator, a CEO. And she grew up in Minneapolis, which we'll hear about a little bit today as well. She's had quite the career path, zigzagging, pivoting, if you will, to reach this point. Teach for America alum, to lawyer, to nonprofit founder, fighting today for all of our 1.2 million students within the Arizona education system. And I am thankful and happy to be here with you.
Yeah,
thank you.
I'm excited. Thanks for that intro.
So you grew up in Minneapolis and you have an interesting relationship with education and the school system growing up. Traditional schooling was not necessarily doing the trick fully for you. It wasn't necessarily your favorite. Tell us a little bit about your experiences as a child growing up in Minneapolis and the school system.
Well, I love to learn and I was very curious. I always was asking why. And I usually found myself in the hallway with a desk, focusing on my own schooling path. So very early on, there was definitely a signal that it was not student-centered. I spent much of my time reading in the spare time because I just wanted to be challenged. And so we'd go to the library every week. I'd get this like milk carton full of books and work through them, get a whole new round the next week. We had to like switch libraries. So that was.
What were some of those books that you were like just really digging into as a kid?
Clifford the Big Red Dog.
Okay,
for sure.
Well, and Clifford, if I remember, I mean, what was the draw for Clifford for you?
Well, I'm Emily Anne, and the owner was Emily Elizabeth, so I just always felt like they got the name wrong because I could really relate. So
next time.
Everything, yeah.
That's great. So you're in the hallway, and what is it that you're doing in the hallway at school as you're out there? I mean, what is it that you're thinking, processing through as you're doing that?
Honestly, it was like, I guess I'm the teacher and the student, so I just enjoyed nerding out on books and trying to push limits. In high school, I hope no family members are tuning in, but I used to skip school a lot and go to the library because I was just bored. I was really bored. So at the time, they didn't have a gifted program in my school. So I wanted to keep pushing the limits. And so I certainly learned early on that learning can happen outside of the classroom. But I'm also, grateful for the skills I did learn around perseverance in my unique schooling experience for sure.
Well, you come from a really long lineage of women who were well educated. Education was super important in your household. Tell us a little bit about that and just the messages and what you were learning from your own family before you as well.
Yeah, so a lot of my grandmothers, great grandmothers, everyone before them, women had received 4-year degrees. My grandparents met in college. I had college professors in the lineage. My great aunt Izzy, she helped found the Minneapolis Public Library system. Wow. And so lots of learning. It was very much drilled in me that education was that key to be able to create the most value in the world. And so I'm very grateful for that messaging and want to do my part to create that opportunity for others.
Which you're doing an excellent job of. So you're in Minneapolis and then eventually move to Wisconsin, to New York, and you make your way all the way out here. What was the draw of Phoenix? I mean, what was it that got you out here?
Number one, no snow. No joke.
And that is probably why also for all of you watching and tweeting, your Twitter handle is
Gully of the Sun.
Gully of the Sun. Very clever. Sunshine. I always love a good pun.
Yeah.
So
also, Phoenix had a good reputation for opportunity as a young person. Lots of leadership pathways, really a chance to change the world. So I came out here with Teach for America and worked in the classroom just down the block.
So with Teach for America, for those of us that are familiar with that, but also there are some that may not be as familiar with it. That's what brought you here originally. And most people don't think of education or being a teacher necessarily as the prime place for learning entrepreneurial skills, but you were picking some up. So what did you learn through your experience with Teach for America?
You are constantly on your feet. Mm-hmm. You set a big goal, and then you need to have like 25 different plans because you need to pivot and adjust sometimes between homeroom and first period. Something failed, you need to adjust. Certainly learned grit and perseverance, lots of failure and pivoting over the lunch hour.
Yes.
We were very scrappy and resourceful. So I was in the classroom right after a major budget cut. And so you had to get really resourceful. And then really realizing that every class had its own personality. And so you constantly had to adapt to those consumers of knowledge and figure out new ways to deliver at the highest level. Lots of public speaking. And you certainly learned just how to not give up, right? Like lives are depending on you, kids' futures are on the line. So it certainly led to that sense of urgency and always having a long to-do list, but what is most important that's going to set them up for success?
Well, one of the things that came through when we were talking and preparing for this and is just your true passion and love for the students. And that was the driving force, the motivation, everything. Tell us a little bit about what your classrooms were like and what was that environment like?
Yeah, I joked with Jonathan that I think the fire marshal was called a few times on me because I figured if you didn't like the lesson, you should at least learn something on the wall. But, I had the privilege of teaching ancient world civilizations, which was not really something middle schoolers want to learn about. And so you had to bring it to life. I learned how to rap. I learned how to do lots of things.
Are you going to practice
at
all? Oh, okay.
That was my next session. And just bring learning to life, making it applicable to today. Why should a 13-year-old care about ancient Rome? So
that's a good question.
Keeps you on your toes.
So your whole classroom kind of very interactive in general. Yes. And really you were trying new things. I mean, that's how you're picking up some of those entrepreneurial skills. Like you said, lunch hour pivots. I feel like that should be a hashtag, lunch hour pivots for teachers moving forward.
Usually every day.
So at that time, you're drinking Red Bulls like crazy. You're staying up. You're doing all the work for these kids. Tell us about kind of the next step and what was happening after that and why you took that step.
Yeah, my school was closing down to have a restart. It had been an underperforming school for a while, and I was very motivated by the bureaucratic hoops I'd had to try to navigate and maneuver over the years, and really what I'd seen around expectations and beliefs in all kids. So I thought law school was the solution. I thought I could benefit the greater good through the courtroom. And boy, were my eyes opened as to what was possible. But I thought that was the next right step.
So you're really taking these kind of unconventional paths. You go from teacher, you go to lawyer, and then kind of following that, now that you've taken that path, it eventually leads you to some ideas for the students. Again, just coming back to the students, and that is really what led to the beginning of A for Arizona. Tell us about that unconventional start that you had there as well.
Yeah, so I had the privilege of meeting former state superintendent Lisa Keegan. She said, let's take your love for law and teaching and plop you into public policy. And I was like, that sounds great. So we made it. We, looked at the way that business folks look at, how do we scale what works? How do we replicate and shine a light on best practices? And instead of just focusing on school improvement, realizing there's a great pathway forward there. However, no one had really approached education reform in that light. So we didn't fit into normal grant applications. It was quite a learning opportunity of yet again not fitting in the box.
Right.
And so we actually first got funded from a Shark Tank competition. At the time, there was a group of philanthropic foundations nationally who said, maybe we're missing out on some really great ideas. Shark Tank was trending. And so they did their own education Shark Tank in partnership with America Succeeds. And we went off to compete and we took home we won. So that was how we first got to sort of incubate and bring this crazy audacious idea to life.
So basically, you that's what founded this entire thing, this brain trust of people. And how many people were you competing against in that? What was the? What was
like
that
a dozen.
Oh, that's awesome. So with what you were doing, you now have this nonprofit. You're really trying to make an impact and bring innovation into the schools. So as A for Arizona, tell us about some of that initial vision and what it was that you're trying to set out to accomplish.
Yeah, so we absolutely believe that every child deserves access to high quality school, learning opportunities, and we want them to get that now and not years from now, right? So one of the questions people always ask me is about, why aren't you focused on saving failing schools? And the question really is like, well, how long should a child have to wait? So we think that's very important work. And there are other amazing nonprofits in town locally and nationally focused on that. But for us, how do we accelerate the education entrepreneurs who are leading the way with great models, really have figured out that secret sauce of how kids learn in Arizona, from the border in Nogales up to Snowflake and in between. We have so many amazing models that recognize the different learning needs and styles for kids. And so we really thought, what would happen if we put great minds in a room together and figured out how to accelerate and grow their impact to serve more kids and families, and also figure out what are those barriers? What are those regulatory handcuffs that are keeping them from doing even greater, meaningful models and programs, teaching and learning approaches that would best serve kids?
That's excellent. Now, regulatory handcuffs. What do you want to do to those things?
Get rid of them. Some regulation, of course. I'm a big believer in accountability, but some of the rules and restrictions, especially that have been on school districts, it limits what our folks on the ground, right, to drive at community-driven solutions. They know our students best along with their educators. How can we empower them, give them some of those guardrails to really drive Arizona forward?
Yeah. And you call these people the feet on the ground, the edupreneurs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They also, like us, don't like being told no. So it's, how can we look at it differently? How do we think outside the box? True problem solvers and solution oriented, lots of grit, very results oriented, constantly taking in data and driving at new opportunities for their students.
What's some of that data? You talked to me a little bit about that, about the teachers that are really being the most innovative, and how are they setting up their classrooms even with that in mind? And what is the data that they're looking at regularly?
Yeah, so all of these schools you go into, there's a data war room. Yeah. It's very hip. So if you like data, we can take you to one of them, and just constantly engaging. A lot of the classrooms have data files. Each student is responsible for, knows their goal, is driving at it. And, some of the more, the newer approaches where we want those proof points and proven practices, looking at student engagement, looking at academic growth. Today, there was a great piece nationally in the 74 million that talked about Arizona having the highest academic gains in the country.
Exciting.
And, we are making huge progress, huge momentum, and kids are benefiting.
Yeah, incredible. So you, as A for Arizona, you're helping really catalyze this innovation within the people that are on the ground. Tell us about some of the milestones and just activities that you've been up to as A for Arizona. What are some of the initiatives that you have in motion, and what are some of the results you're seeing?
Sure. When we first started, there were 350,000 low-income students that were in a D or F rated school. Now there's about 100,000, still far too many students that do not yet have access to a high quality education. Lots of work to continue there as to what really it can be defined as a high quality learning center. But we're certainly making momentum forward as a state. And we really take these great ideas from schoolers. I wish I could take credit, but they're really smart, and we figure out how to get rid of those policy barriers. There were some great teacher certification reforms we've done in the past, and it really changed the role of what is a 21st century educator, talent pipelines that the business community is very well versed in, right? They kind of were broken for some of these really high flying schools, these disruptive models. And so looking at different ways to get high quality educators into the classroom, and also what those roles could look like once they're there. We just helped seek victory, I guess, to some seat time flexibility and innovation. What does that mean for those of you not in the K-12 wonk world? It's that, we still have the same amount of learning time for every student, but it can be much more personalized and student-centered. The place and space for how learning occurs, what course schedules look like, the opportunity for more advanced courses, really making sure that any skill gaps a student might have can be backfilled instead of just kind of moving along because your age group is moving along. Just so much possibility for what schooling can look like, especially on our district side. They've never had this kind of flexibility if they want it. So it's not a mandate, but for those who really want to embrace this, there's a lot of possibility for what schooling can look like in the upcoming months. And, we're also learning a lot from industries that aren't ours.
Yeah, tell us about that.
So we obviously lead the way in autonomous vehicles, modern technology, and our transportation options for K-12 schooling is very outdated. We still, despite having this really robust set of educational options across the state, we still really resort to a one size fits all, for the most part, solution on how to take kids to and from school. And so, over the years, it's been a huge budget element.
Yeah.
It's a hassle, and of course, you want safety as number one priority. But there's also been some great ideas coming up from leaders on the ground on how to make things more efficient, more effective, kids less in travel time, more time learning. And so we're working on a great initiative around sort of a bundle of transportation ideas that those who want to innovate and try to change and shake up the way that they've been transferring students, whether it's a cluster of students or like a really high demand school, looking at viable options as to how to get kids to school.
Because right now, I was shocked by this, but tell everyone about just the law that's in place that even restricts some of those options.
Yeah, so in the 1930s, there was an agreement
Just
around
little time ago.
Yeah, around the national yellow paint color for the school bus, and that this is sort of the token way that you'll get funded for transferring kids to and from schools. And it doesn't account for geographic differences. It doesn't account for involvement from parents or community partners, neighborhood carpools, ride sharing opportunities, modern technology that's come about, made sense back then, but really doesn't account for 2021 modernization options to come alongside, right? And so some of these solutions are meant to make that bus route most efficient for kids who need it most, and to think outside the box on some other ways, again, to hopefully save dollars and also more time for learning.
Wow, that's amazing. So with what you've been doing, you've had some really big wins, just even at that state level as well. Tell us a little bit about some of the expansion and innovation fund and some of the work that you're doing in that regard.
Yeah, so we launched an expansion and innovation fund in 2018 in partnership with the Bob and Renee Parsons Foundation, the Burton Family Foundation, and some other great local investors. And we had said, here's what we see is happening in the business community and the startup community. We also have leaders that have really bold ideas how to better serve kids, but a lot of folks were risk adverse, right? Like not wanting to take a chance on that. So it's totally meant to seed really great, bold ideas that will best serve students and get results. So we have funded about $1.5 million to date of 30 plus projects at this point. And it's so inspiring because every model really takes in their local community context, and they've got their own unique metrics of here's our end goal. We make sure that researchers can engage, that other school leaders or community members can engage. Our current batch, we've got over 61 community partners, business leaders, agencies plugged in with applicants because they want to do schooling and learning differently. We know that before the pandemic, not every child had access to high quality education yet, right? And that all their needs were being met. In some cases, that was exacerbated during the pandemic. And in others, because of some of those regulation waivers, they were really able to flourish with better ways of delivering teaching and learning, better approaches that met a certain subset of their students that maybe hadn't been reached before.
So with those partners that you talked about, it doesn't have to just be the teachers and the parents and these others involved. You're at PHX Startup with a lot of business leaders or those that are innovating within their own community. So what are some of the things that you're hoping for from the rest of the community, and how can others be getting involved in some of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to have some pretty big grant rounds coming up, and we are always looking for thought partners. A lot of the schools are the ones with the great ideas, but as we mentioned, this is an unprecedented territory for a lot of our leaders to be able to have this kind of flexibility for which to really focus on what works best for kids. And so we need entrepreneurial minds at the table. We're going to be executing at A for Arizona some decision and design sprints, really helping leaders be set up for success to think and act boldly, right, for real children and real change right now. And, you know, this first batch wouldn't have been possible without Governor Ducey. He was the first governor in the country and remains one of the only ones who took advantage of the Federal CARES Act funding and wanted to infuse dollars towards innovation, right? And it's unfortunate more governors haven't taken note and scaled that, because the ROI to benefit almost 21,000 students right out the gate, it's been huge. And, you know, just this semester, we were able to benefit 1,000 new students who were not in a high quality classroom experience and learning environment as of December. And now they're thriving. And so there's so many gains for kids, but also from the community. It really is this new unprecedented opportunity to come alongside and help leaders think bigger, right? We shouldn't have to operate in our silo. They're creating your future workforce, right? A lot of them are really hungry for what could a 21st century school look like. We funded a few total school redesigns who said, let's take advantage of this opportunity and rethink what those learning styles, those courses, those project-based experiences should look like. And they've brought in business leaders, they've brought in advisory boards, they've partnered up with companies. Some are startups, some are some of the larger employers in the state, and others in between, right? And so there's so much opportunity from leaders that really want to jump in. And so we'd love to get to know you, because we're constantly hearing great ideas folks want to pursue, and knowing they don't have to do it alone and that they have great thought partners that are ready to drive forward for kids with them. It's a game changer.
Well, one of the things you're just always connecting back to is, hey, this is for the kids. It's for the kids, for the kids. And as much as, you know, when we talk about education, a lot of people think that a lot of the sound bites that we're hearing from media and from other sources, it's really not necessarily all about the kids. What's some of the opposition, and what are some of the hurdles that you've had to overcome in any startup environment? There's always a challenge, an obstacle, something you have to overcome. What are some of the things that you've had to fight against, and you know, just even educating more of the startup community as to what some of those real data points are that we can then help spread with our friends and family as well?
There are a lot.
There are.
Well, I'd say number one, you know, there are a lot of organizations who rightfully so are there to represent the grown-ups in the system. And they do a phenomenal job of representing the grown-ups in the system, but that doesn't necessarily lead to positive changes that are centered and focused around what's best for students. There has been a mindset gap in Arizona for a while that we've been combating, about the fact that every child can learn at the highest level. And that is something we hope everyone that's tuned in fully believes and can share with others, because you'd be surprised that it's 2021 and where people believe certain kids can only learn at a certain bandwidth. And I think also, you know, when people hear the word innovation, there's sometimes, I think, fear. But in this case, we really saw what could be possible and permission when leaders were given that opportunity to lead, right? And to really look at the facts. What is the biggest problem? And how are we going to come up with a solution that better serves our kids and families? And I think that you know, a lot of school models still look kind of the same as when you were in the classroom or I was in the classroom or someone else. And that works for some kids and families, but not everyone. And so for those who do want and have the permission now to really go forth with other kinds of models and approaches to teaching and learning, how do we kind of wrap around them? Because, you know, change is scary. And there's a lot of folks that don't want to see change, but it really leads to new opportunities, right? For educators, maybe they're looking at leaving the classroom, but if they knew that that other model was where they could flourish, right? It can tackle some of the the pain points you hear from various media outlets.
So what are some of the things that you would love to, even just while we're here, that you hear often, but you would come at it from a different angle, so that we have some of that information as well?
Well, there's definitely a lot of messaging around serving all kids. And there are examples that have become really apparent where not all kids are necessarily being prioritized or served. We're currently working on some tough conversations around open enrollment practices. For those of you who are not from Arizona, you might not have open enrollment in your state, but essentially it creates opportunities within the public traditional system for you as a family to find the right public school model that works for you. It could be down the block instead of your assigned neighborhood school. It could be across the way in a different district, but in every situation, you've got high flyers and those going above and beyond, and you have some bad actors and bad apples. So it's realizing that I think at the end of the day, our intent is all, we really do want kids to flourish.
Yeah.
It's just some of those delivery practices have been hard to swallow in the last few months.
That's a lot that you're going up against, and a number of things just that we've talked about here is around this idea of entrepreneurship within a nonprofit environment. So you might, as we talked, you had a little bit of hesitation even in yourself to call yourself an entrepreneur, even though that's clearly what you are. Why is that? Tell us a little bit about why you hesitate to use that word for yourself.
I think it comes to labels. Like, I don't like being in a box, right? Because once you attach a label, then that's your sort of your stigma, right? So I think a great example is back to some of my students. A handful of my students, many of my students had former juvenile records, for example, right? And I was told to look at them as a certain way. And they ended up, many of them, being my highest performing students. Their minds did not match some of the behavior choices they did, but that was an assumption that a lot of my colleagues unfortunately made. And so, once we're putting people into that, it's limiting, right? And so I am flattered and honored to be around a bunch of entrepreneurs, but that's just, I'm a millennial too, right? And so there's lots of stigmas about millennials, but one of them is that we want to change the world, right? And so there are elements I like to take on, but I think that one of the challenges, especially in K-12 education for so long, has been about when it's this or that, right? It's here or there, it's a district or a charter, it's a traditional model or something else, right? And instead, what we've seen at Arizona is when you're able to share what's working, when you're able to spotlight, like, how did you do that? Or do you know who's doing that really well? Like, you need to know so-and-so. Right. Then they can adapt and pivot and scale up what's going to really work at their entity. And so all of the people I hang out with, right, they don't fit neatly in a box. You can't really define them. My favorite question when we first launched A for Arizona was, like, what's the checklist? What is an A school, right? They wanted this perfect box. Like, here's the 5 traits you must deliver on. And the greatest part was there isn't a formula, right? Like, everyone had high quality school culture, amazing, passionate, rigorous teachers. And they also, but all of their models looked different, right? And so I guess I've been resistant to labels.
Well, actually, one of the stories you had shared with me as we were preparing for this is that when Teach for America called you, you said, no, I'm not a teacher, right? So this is a consistent pattern throughohout your life.
This is my norm.
I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm not a teacher.
No, it's a norm. Yeah, for sure. The funny part about that is, like, I was joking with Jonathan. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was like a TA and a former a snowboarding instructor, skiing instructor, swim coach, all these things that like clearly make you ready to teach and thrive. But more labels.
More labels. Well, I'm gonna assign a label to you. I think that you are a vanguard, and I think as I think about that word, here I have a definition here. It says it's a group of people leading the way in new developments or ideas, or a position at the forefront of new developments and ideas. So if you don't like the word entrepreneur, you can stick that one on your LinkedIn profile.
K-12 Vanguard.
There you go. K-12 Vanguard. There are a lot of ways, you've already mentioned some of them, that those within the community can get involved. But one more time, just in case people didn't catch it, how is it that they can get involved with A for Arizona, learn more about what you're doing, and get connected to you?
Absolutely. Well, you can check out our website. So it's afораrizona.org. And there's a place for you to get involved. You can sign up for our newsletter. You can get plugged in with me. You can follow us on Twitter, direct message us. Always happy, love meeting new people, love seeing how we can leverage your brain power and your skills and your talents. And always looking for additional community partners, especially for this next batch of Expansion and Innovation Fund recipients. Again, we've got some big grants coming up this spring and summer you don't want to miss. And so there will be a ton of opportunities for startups, mid-sized companies, larger companies to really get engaged and make meaningful change. There's so much possibility right now. And so we're really excited and would love to have you join us.
So before we turn it over to some other questions, I just have one last question for you. As you think about Arizona, and the education system here, what's your hope for it? And what is it that you want to see just within Arizona K-12?
I want every child to have access to an excellent education, and now, not years from now. And there is so much possibility in the next few months where major decisions will be made on all of the infusion of federal funding, all of the new laws that are on the books. And so we need the community engaged and active and participating because these are the future leaders of our state. So we have to stay focused.
Well, Emily Anne, thank you so much. And now we'll open it up, I believe, for some questions. Thanks, Kate.
Yeah, no problem. We have 3 for you, Emily Anne. The first is, I'd love to hear about those transportation ideas for Indigenous communities.
Yeah, so one of the concepts that had come up was around leveraging some of the white fleet vehicles, other options where the road terrains were longer or the geographic regions were different. They don't cost as much for the certification elements. Some of the leaders that we talked to said even having some bus hubs where kids could meet in a certain spot and then be able to commute forward. The great news for the transportation grants that are being considered is that it really is meant to be community conversation. So we don't want it to be limiting by what came out of focus groups and school leaders that we partner with. So those are a few ideas on the table, but the runway, there is a lot of possibility ahead.
Curious about what were some of the obstacles raised by the adults?
Us adults, we get in the way, right?
Yeah. Well, again, I think it comes back to number one is fear. And when leaders are in fear of change, behaviors happen. There's been Facebook Lives, there's been misrepresentations of our organization about me as a leader. There's been pretty heavy spending to try to to try to push back or counter ideas and policies that are really focused around students, and, you know, attacks through social media campaigns and others at governing boards who are embracing new models, right? One of our grant recipients had a full-on sort of micro political campaign at them about trying to resist their desire to move forward with a model that parents and kids really wanted and was meeting a need. And so one of my hopes is that people start realizing like these are viable solutions within the public school system, right? Again, it doesn't need to be black and white of either or, but that if this can meet, even if it's a small subset of students' needs, like, isn't that a great thing, right? If then their trajectory is set forth and they're able to thrive and have their needs met, and instead of feeling like it's an attack. That is not my intent here. It is absolutely to help schools, communities flourish, but most importantly, because they're able to make those decisions around kids and what's best for them.
And you said it already, it's that there's a resistance to change, that whenever funding is potentially at risk, that's when fear kind of creeps up. And so these ad hominem attacks come at you. So again, kudos to you for continuing to fight the fight.
Thank you.
They need to review Eric Bailey's talk yesterday. He's a psychologist, and he told us about how asking questions with an empathetic lens to not have one side be right or wrong, right?
I'm a big fan of that approach, Kate.
Yes, I know you are. So next question, what are you looking to do to assist high school students with math?
Great question. Well, one of the things that we've done historically is we've really cleared the runway for advanced coursework opportunities, whether it's dual enrollment, concurrent enrollment with community colleges, university systems, accelerating advanced coursework earlier on with early college credit access. Right now, under the new law, that's 24 hours ripe, it's really around some mastery-based models. And so there's some great innovation underway with one of our major partners, the Center for the Future of Arizona. They have this personalized learning network, and they are partnering with some major districts in the state, Yuma Union High School District, Mesa, Santa Cruz Valley Unified. So not just sort of in the Phoenix urban core, but trying to transform what schooling looks like. That's really around that personal student, so that their skills, they don't move on without deep mastery of all of that content, which is a totally different way of looking at learning than when I was hanging out in the hallway. So if you're accelerating, we shouldn't hold you back, right? We have a Grand Canyon diploma, which is a fancy type of high school degree where you can graduate early, right? But for those students who might be struggling, these new model opportunities are just so exciting, because you really will make sure that you get all of those skills mastered instead of missing certain gaps before you're moving on to that next course.
Great. Here's one for you. Could you share which parts of the Valley that you've been able to partner with so far? Our housing and schooling are still highly segregated. Any interesting partnerships that you've had in parts of the Valley that serve underinvested communities or kids who have been systematically discriminated against?
Yeah, that's a great question. I totally failed to neglect to say that most of our partners are around 70% or greater free and reduced lunch populations. And a lot of them have high homeless youth populations, exceptional students, and English language learners. And it's less around partnering up with a whole system, but it's more finding those entrepreneurial minded leaders. So some of them are principals, some of them are system leaders. South Phoenix has a whole batch of rock stars in the district arena, but also in the charter arena. Maryville has what we've nicknamed a golden corridor of excellence. It is this whole set of schools, from the Gifted and Talented Academy, that's a small school off of Maryville High, Western School of Science and Technology, You have a classical academy with Maryville Prep. There's all these models literally almost around one single block. Sunset School's there. And so I think what we've really seen from when we first started is that once one school can prove what's possible, others around them get inspired, because it's like you have the same school demographics. And so it's harder to turn that eye or make excuses, and instead being that inspirational spotlight, if you will. And so, you know, they pop up throughout. There's plenty in Central Phoenix. There's like growing clusters. And again, I think that's leaves us with hope, because you're really seeing the possibility flourish.
And you mentioned briefly, but a lot of your work is within rural communities too. It's not necessarily just within the Phoenix metro. And that's an important piece.
I do want to give a shout out. So
Yeah,
if you want to know where awesome things are happening, you have to go to Santa Cruz County. I know this is all about Phoenix, but people in Phoenix can learn from them too. Rio Rico and Nogales, they have some of the best educators in the state. They got a national shout out for having some of the top academic gains in the whole country. So don't let rural and remote limit you in what you believe is possible for students. They are innovators. They have been grant recipients of our innovation fund. They are constantly pushing the needle on what is possible for kids.
And I love what you said about the different communities, and it just starts happening. It's like innovation is contagious.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Do you feel like since we've had COVID and we've had more people be able to empathize with the challenges of education through one-on-one experience? I mean, it's been in our homes, right? We've all become, we've gotten a little sip of what it's like to be a teacher. Have you felt that there's more support for your work because of that?
I think parents' eyes have been opened. And in some cases, parents thought a school model was a certain way and it wasn't. In other cases, they were like, yes, this model, this approach, this learning style is really working well for my student. Some families that I know have shifted and realized, like, I thought that this particular school or model was the right fit, and now I'm seeing like it doesn't really meet my learners' needs. But it is so commonplace in Arizona to have, especially in Phoenix, 1 in 2 students do not attend their sort of like assigned neighborhood school. And so it's very common in households that like multiple students are in a different model, even within like the same system, right? One student might flourish at a STEM school or an art school or a Montessori approach, all these different cool opportunities. And so I think what's really happened is, yes, belief in the importance of education, but also realizing that every learner in that household has different traits, different learning styles, different goals, different beat for how they digest information. And that's what I'm really excited about, is that parents have really, I think, gotten to know their learner in a whole different way than just the parent hat, right? As to what really excites their child and how to best get those skills and talents to move them forward.
That's awesome. Certainly my experience as well during all of this. Well, Jonathan, Emily Anne, thank you so much for your time. This was enlightening. Thank you for the work that you're both doing. CEO at Journeyage, Jonathan, and A for Arizona CEO, Emily Anne. Thank you so much.
Yes, lots are coming at you. So tune in to A for Arizona, and thanks for joining us.
Yes, take care. Be well.